Good Erev Shabbos. This week's Parsha, one of the most bizarre and troubling stories in the Torah. We find with seemingly troubling judgment made on one of the patriarchs' behalf, Yitzchak's behalf, in terms of his choice of who to impart the famous blessings to. The famous blessings to Esau rather than Yaakov. And if not for this whole scheme that was hatched by Rivka together with Yaakov to get the blessings, it seemed that the blessings would have gone to Esau. One cannot come away from just a cursory review of the Parsha and ask, what was Yitzchak thinking? Already from the beginning of the Parsha, it seems rather strange. It says in the beginning of the Parsha, "V'yahav Yitzchak es Esav kitzayid b'fiv." Yitzchak liked Esav. He loved Esav because he, whatever he hunted, he had that food in his mouth. Rivka heves es Yaakov. Rivka loved Yaakov. Previous pasuk states that Vahi Esav Yodea Ish Said Ish Sadeh, that Esav was a man that hunted. Yaakov Ish Tam Yoshe B'Holem. Yaakov was a man who was complete with his faith, a wholesome man with his faith in the tent, studying the Torah, studying the religious texts. So here you have two boys growing up, one very pious, one very devout, one very full of faith, and the other one hunting, killing, out in the fields, not living a very productive life. And Isaac, Yitzchak, makes a choice to love him more, so to speak, it seems, and not only that, choose to impart the preferred blessings on Esau. Later on in the Parsha, it says that toward the end of Yitzchak's life, he gathered Esau to his side, and he said, "I want you to make for me a nice meal. And Aseli matamim kasher ahavti, I want you to make the delicious foods as I like. V'havili v'ochela, and bring it to me and I will eat it. Ba'avor tevarechecha nafshi b'terem amos, so that I will bless you before I die." So Rivka in the background hears all this, and she hatches the scheme, as I mentioned, with Yaakov and this whole elaborate scheme. Yitzchak struggled with his eyesight, so he was unable to understand that it was really Yaakov there, and he ends up blessing Yaakov instead of Esau, and then Esau hears about it and is furious, and then Parsha ends up on a somewhat of a somber note that Esau wants to kill Yaakov, and Yaakov has to run for his life from the land of Canaan. But the central question that I want to zero back in on is, what was Yitzchak thinking with his preference for Esau? He has two sons, one's devout, one's pious, one's the scholar, one's the man of faith, and one's the person that wastes his time in the fields. At best, at worst, he's involved in all sorts of ill activities. And yet Esau is the one that Yitzchak wants to bless. Esau is the one that the Torah says he loves more. So I think this teaches us an important lesson in life. It teaches us a lesson in lost potential. And that is that the reason why Yitzchak loved Esau so much was because he recognized his potential. And he believed that Esau, or he wanted to believe that Esau would tap into his potential. Of course, he knew that Yaakov was the scholar, Yaakov was pious, Yaakov was more devout, Yaakov was more full of faith, Yaakov was more refined in his character. That wasn't a question. But he hoped that through engaging in the world, Esav can be somewhat of a gentleman as well. According to the Malbim, the way the Malbim puts it is Yitzchak's vision for this relationship between Yaakov and Esav was he hoped it would be like the relationship between Yisachar and Zevulun. Yisachar was the scholar, the teacher, the one that was pious, devout. Zevulun was the businessman, who was in commerce, finance. But they had a good relationship. They supported one another. Zevulun supported Yisachar financially, and Yisachar supported Zevulun with his Torah study. He was able to, Zevulun was able to get reward from Yisachar's Torah study. That was an ideal relationship. Just because a man was not making his daytime pursuit with Torah study does not mean that his life is written off. Not at all. Look at Zevulun and Yisachar. So that's what, when Yitzchak saw that he was out in the fields, Yitzchak saw that Esav was hunting, so what? He has a lot of potential. But potential remains just that. If it's not harnessed and it's not brought to fruition. It says in the beginning of the Torah, the first 6 days of creation, everything God created this and it was good. God created that and it was good. God created the sun and the moon and the was good. He created the lions and tigers and bears. And he said it was good. He created the mountains and valleys. He said it was good. Everything he said it was good. Lakes, rivers, and oceans, and God said it was good. There was one thing that God created, does not say Vayar Elokim Kitov. And that is, he doesn't say by creation of man, by Adam, Vayar Elokim Kitov. The reason is, the rabbis teach us, is because man's creation is not necessarily good, because man's ultimate destiny is dependent upon man's free will. So God can only say kitov at the end of a man's life. Is it going to be good or not? Depends how each and every person will choose. Ray, nasati lechem esachayim v'satov v'samav v'sasarov. It doesn't say for Dvarim in the book of Deuteronomy, I've given before you the good and the life, and the bad and the evil. B'charta b'chaim, you shall choose life. So it's up to each and every one of us to choose life, to choose goodness, to make the correct choices. And if we do so, it's to our credit. And if we don't do so, it's to our detriment. And we ultimately are responsible for either of the choices that we make. So when it came to Esav, Esav was full of potential. He, after all, was the son of Yitzchak, the grandson of Abraham. And he wasn't going to be the scholar. He wasn't going to be the rabbi. He wasn't going to be the devout one. But Yitzchak was hoping he can be the businessman. He can be the one that can support the infrastructure of education, support the infrastructure of learning, to support the infrastructure of faith. If you look at the end of the parsha, the Malbim points out the Birkas Avram, the blessing that Abraham gave Isaac, Abraham gave Yitzchak, was never in question. Yitzchak had never intended to give that to Yitzchak. Yitzchak gave that to Yaakov. It says, "V'yitin l'cha Birkas Abraham." It says, "You shall have the blessing of Abraham." L'chol zaracha itach. That was never in question. The question was the other blessing, the blessing of the materialism. The blessing of the materialism, the one he had intended to give Esav, was v'yitin l'chalokim mitala shamayim u'shmani haaretz. You shall have from the dew of the heaven and the fatness of the earth, and abundant grain and wine, much grain and wine. That's what he told. He wanted to tell Esav, but he told Yaakov. But the reason why he wanted to tell Esav that was because he thought if he gave Esav that blessing, Esav would be able to use those material resources to support the infrastructure of Torah and tradition and faith. But ultimately, that was wishful thinking. And Rivka was more realistic. Rivka realized that that was wishful thinking because, yes, Esav had potential, but he chose the wrong path. And therefore, she asked Yaakov, in her realism, to take over the blessings. And she hatched this whole scheme because she realized that Yitzchak refused to come to terms with this reality. And Yitzchak was too much of a wishful thinker in this regard. But one of the overriding lessons for us all is how much potential each and every one of us has. Even Esav had tremendous amounts of potential to the point that Yitzchak wanted to give him this special blessing. But he ultimately proved not to be worthy of it. Ultimately chose to go down a different path. But what about us? We have so much potential in our lives. Are we utilizing it? Are we utilizing God-given strengths, talents, and skills that we are blessed in this world with? The God-given talents, strengths, and skills that God gave us to be successful in this world. To utilize that for the study of Torah, coming to tefillah, to prayers, engaging in mitzvahs, or are we not utilizing them properly? Because as we learned from Esav, potential is just that, when it's not harnessed. So as I've mentioned in the last several weeks, the study of the Parshios of Bereshis are a time to take stock of our own lives and to reflect on the lessons that we learn in these ancient stories, but not just leave them as stories on a shelf, but ask ourselves how they can pertain to us. And when it comes to the story of Yaakov and Esav, let's never forget the potential that Esav had. And let's never lose sight of the awesome responsibility that we have in our lives to make sure that we utilize our potential in the most effective way. I wish you all a good Erev Shabbos.